Level 1. The child of post-war Britain. There was a time, not so long ago, when Britain looked different, not just in fashion or architecture, but in body. 1970s. Walking down a high street meant passing faces that were leaner, bodies that moved with a different ease. Children ran wild through neighborhoods until the streetlights flickered on. Adults walked to work, to the shops, to the pub. No one called it exercise. It was simply life. At this level, no one questioned what they ate because the choices were simpler. Breakfast was porridge or toast with butter, real butter, not the chemical spreads that would come later. Lunch might be a sandwich made at home, wrapped in wax paper, carried in a school bag, or a worker's satchel. Dinner was cooked from scratch because there was no alternative. Frozen meals existed, but they were novelties, not norms. The kitchen smelled of boiling vegetables, roasting meat, and the faint bitterness of instant coffee. Children in this era didn't snack endlessly. There was no cupboard overflowing with crisps and biscuits, no fridge stocked with fizzy drinks. A treat was a treat, a chocolate bar on Saturday, a bag of sweets shared among siblings. The body didn't need to fight constant waves of sugar because those waves simply didn't exist. Hunger came and went naturally, like the tides, and meals marked the rhythm of the day. This was the beginning, the baseline. People didn't think about their weight because their environment didn't force them to. They moved because stillness wasn't an option. They ate what was available, and what was available was mostly real food. There was no wellness industry, no calorie counting apps, no Instagram influencers preaching intermittent fasting. There was just living, but beneath this simplicity lay something profound. 1970s. Britain existed in a world that hadn't yet been transformed by convenience, by speed, by the relentless optimization of profit over health. They were innocent participants in a way of life that kept them naturally lean, not through discipline or willpower, but through circumstance. They were beginners in a journey they didn't know they were on, and the first level was built on foundations they couldn't see. This level teaches us something vital. Our bodies respond to our environment more than our intentions. When the default setting is movement and real food, slimness isn't an achievement. It's simply what happens. Level 2. The era of subtle change. By the mid to late 1970s, something was beginning to shift. Supermarkets were expanding, offering not just variety but novelty. Processed foods crept onto shelves, tinned meals, instant desserts, brightly colored cereals that turned milk into syrup. Advertising became more sophisticated, more persuasive. Television told families what they should want, and slowly, what they wanted began to change. At this level, Britons were still slim, but the mechanisms that kept them that way were starting to erode. The walk to the corner shop was replaced, for some, by a drive to the supermarket. The homemade meal was occasionally swapped for something quicker, easier, wrapped in plastic. These weren't dramatic shifts. No one noticed the ground moving beneath their feet, but the journey toward a heavier future had begun. Portion sizes remained modest by today's standards. A chocolate bar was smaller. A fizzy drink came in a glass bottle, not a liter container. Eating out was rare, reserved for special occasions. Fast food existed, but it hadn't yet colonized every high street corner. The social fabric still centered around home-cooked meals, around families gathered at a table without screens, without distractions. Work was changing too. Manufacturing jobs, physical, demanding, were still common. Men and women labored with their bodies, not just their minds. Even office workers walked more, climbed stairs, moved through their days with an energy expenditure that modern life has engineered away. The body was still a tool, not just a vessel for the brain. This level is about gradual transformation. It's about the small compromises that seem harmless in isolation, but accumulate into something larger. 1970s. Britain was still slim, but the seeds of a different future were being planted. They were in the grinding phase, not grinding toward fitness, but grinding through a cultural shift they didn't fully understand. The lesson here is stark. Change doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in convenience, in ease, in the slow replacement of effort with automation. The intermediate stage of Britain's slimness was really the beginning of its end. Level 3. The architecture of leanness. To truly understand why Britons were so slim in the 1970s, we must examine the architecture, the invisible structures that shaped daily life. This is the level of deeper knowledge, where we move beyond anecdotes and into patterns, into the mechanics of a society that produced lean bodies without trying. First, consider food itself. The British diet of 1970s was far from perfect. Heavy on meat and potatoes, light on vegetables, often bland and repetitive. But it had one critical advantage. It was largely unprocessed. Sugar consumption, while present, was a fraction of what it would become. The average Briton consumed about 90 pounds of sugar per year. Today, that number has nearly doubled. Every biscuit, every dessert, every sweetened tea added up, but slowly, without the concentrated doses modern foods deliver. Second, the built environment enforced movement. Cities and towns were designed before the car dominated everything. People people walked to work, to school, to see friends. Public transportation required walking to stops and stations. Homes had stairs, gardens that needed tending, tasks that demanded physical effort. There were no remote controls, no smartphones, no devices that eliminated the need to stand, to walk, to reach, to bend. Third, eating patterns were structured. 3 meals a day, consumed at roughly the same times, without the constant grazing that characterizes modern eating. There was breakfast before work, lunch at midday, dinner in the evening. Between these meals, the body had time to rest, to digest, to use stored energy. The concept of snacking existed, but it wasn't the default mode of consumption. Fourth, portion sizes reflected a different relationship with food. Scarcity was a recent memory. The rationing of World War II had ended only in 1954, and that legacy lingered. Food was valued but not worshipped. Waste was avoided. Plates were smaller, expectations were modest, and eating until uncomfortable was unusual, not celebrated. This level reveals the truth. Slimness wasn't a choice, but an outcome of systems. 1970s. Britain was a student of a craft they didn't know they were learning. They were shaped by their world, and their world hadn't yet been redesigned to make them sick. Level 4. The comparison. Now we enter the competitive phase, the moment when we hold up the past against the present and feel the weight of the contrast. This is where understanding becomes uncomfortable, where we must confront what we've traded for convenience. Look at photographs from 1970s. Study the crowds at football matches, the families on seaside holidays, the workers leaving factories. Count the bodies that would be considered overweight by today's standards. They're rare, not absent, but rare. Now, look at similar scenes. The transformation is undeniable and heartbreaking. The average British adult today weighs approximately 14 pounds more than they did in the obesity rates have tripled. Type 2 diabetes, once a disease of the elderly, now appears in children. The National Health Service spends billions treating conditions that were uncommon 50 years ago. This isn't about vanity, it's about a public health catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. What changed? Everything and nothing. The human body didn't evolve. Our genes didn't shift, but our environment transformed completely. The food industry discovered that salt, sugar, and fat in precise combinations could override our natural satiety signals, making us eat beyond our needs. Cars became universal, and infrastructure bent to accommodate them. Technology removed physical effort from nearly every task. Work became sedentary. Entertainment became passive. At this level, we're challenged to test ourselves against the evidence. Can we live like the 1970s? Britain? Can we walk more, eat less processed food, turn off screens, cook from scratch? For most of us, the answer is complicated. We want the benefits of their lifestyle without abandoning the conveniences of ours. We want to compete with their leanness while clinging to our comforts. This stage is about reckoning. It's about realizing that the bodies of 1970s weren't the result of superior willpower or better genetics. They were the product of a world that hadn't yet been optimized for profit at the expense of health. And now, competing against that reality means swimming upstream against every current of modern life. Level 5. The veteran's wisdom. After wrestling with the comparison, some of us reach a different place. We become veterans of our own health journeys, seasoned by attempts and failures, by the realization that we cannot simply turn back time. 1970s are gone. The question isn't how to recreate them, but what wisdom we can extract and apply. At this level, we understand that perfection is impossible and unnecessary. We cannot eliminate processed food entirely. It's woven into the fabric of modern existence. We cannot walk everywhere. Our cities are built for cars, our jobs are often far from home, our time is fragmented and precious. But we can make choices, small and incremental, that move us closer to the principles that kept 1970s Britain slim. We can cook more often, even if not every night. We can choose water over soda, whole foods over packaged convenience, movement over stillness whenever possible. We can recognize that our bodies were designed for a world of scarcity and labor, and they struggle in a world of abundance and ease. This isn't our fault, but it is our reality. The veteran also recognizes that individual action alone cannot solve a systemic problem. 1970s Britain was slim because their entire society supported it through food availability, urban design, work patterns, and cultural norms. Today, the opposite is true. Our society is structured to make us sick, and fighting against it requires not just personal discipline, but collective change. This level is about wisdom without bitterness, action without self-flagellation. It's about understanding history not as a judgment, but as a teacher. 1970s didn't have all the answers. Their diet was often nutritionally poor, smoking was ubiquitous, gender roles were rigid, but they had something we've lost, an environment that didn't actively work against human health. health. The seasoned practitioner learns to take what's valuable from the past and adapt it to the present, finding balance between nostalgia and reality. Level 6. The innovator. Now we reach the masters. The people who don't just understand why Britons were slim in the 1970s, but who use that knowledge to innovate, to create solutions, to influence culture. These are the policymakers pushing for better urban design, the entrepreneurs building businesses around real food, the educators teaching children about nutrition, the activists fighting against predatory food marketing. At this level, the focus shifts from personal transformation to systemic change. The innovator recognizes that individual willpower cannot overcome an environment designed for obesity. They work to redesign that environment to make the healthy choice the easy choice, to rebuild the invisible architecture that once kept populations lean without effort. This might mean advocating for walkable cities where mixed-use development puts homes, shops, and workplaces within walking distance. It might mean supporting regulations that limit sugar in foods marketed to children or require clear labeling of processed ingredients. It might mean creating community programs that teach cooking skills or businesses that make affordable, nutritious food accessible. The master sees 1970s not as a lost paradise to mourn, but as a blueprint to adapt. They understand that we cannot and should not abandon modern progress, medicine, technology, social liberation, but we can learn from an era when the default settings of daily life produced healthier bodies, and we can work to recreate those conditions in contemporary forms. These innovators are already among us, though they rarely get the attention they deserve. They're redesigning school meals, creating public exercise programs, challenging the food industry's grip on public policy. They're translating historical wisdom into modern action, refusing to accept that obesity and chronic disease are inevitable prices of progress. This level is about legacy, about building a world where future generations might look back on our era and say, that's when they turned it around. Level 7. The legend. And then there's the final level, the realm of legend, where the truth about why Britons were slim in 1970s becomes not just knowledge, but cultural transformation. This is the stage where understanding reaches critical mass, where enough people know, enough people care, enough people act that society itself begins to shift. Imagine a future where we've learned the lessons, where cities are redesigned for people, not cars, where food is regulated like the powerful drug it is, where sugar and processed ingredients are controlled, where advertising to children is banned, where nutritious food is subsidized and junk food is taxed, where work includes movement, where technology serves us rather than enslaving us, where community and connection replace isolation and screens. This isn't fantasy, it's history, repeating in a better form. Just as 1970s Britain was slim without trying, future generations could be healthy without the constant battle we now face. But it requires legendary action, the kind that changes the trajectory of an entire culture. The legend is also the memory we preserve, the truth that human bodies are not broken, that we're not weak or lacking discipline. We're simply living in a world that makes health extraordinarily difficult. And remembering that 1970s existed, that an entire population was lean, not through heroic effort, but through circumstance, is itself revolutionary. It proves that another way is possible. Tell me, which stage are you in right now? Are you just discovering this truth, feeling the weight of comparison, finding your balance, or working to change the system? Everyone starts as a curious observer, but not everyone chooses to evolve. The journey from understanding history to shaping the future, that's the path of mastery. 1970s, with all their imperfections, left us a map. The question is whether we're brave enough to follow it.